welcome to the sixth webinar of the Financial History webinar series. Today, we have the greatest pleasure of welcoming Beatriz Rodríguez-Satizabal and Sergio Castellanos-Gamboa, who are going to present the paper Los mismos en las mismas, the National Front and the Incomplete Development of a Stock Exchange. Beatriz is a business historian, lecturer at Universidad del Pacífico and member of the History Business Entrepreneurship Research Group at the Universidad de los Andes. Rodríguez-Satizabal holds degrees in economics from Universidad de los Andes, economic history from the London School of Economics and political science, and business and management from Queen Mary University of London. Sergio is an adjunct assistant professor at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. Castellanos-Gamboa holds a PhD in banking and finance from Pacífico University. Sergio obtained a BSc in economics with additional studies in finance and an MSc in economics at Universidad de los Andes. So thank you very much for sharing your work with us today. As always, you're gonna have 30 minutes to present the paper, and then we're gonna have 30 minutes for Q&A. So if you have questions, you can use the raise your hands function of the Zoom offers, or type your question on the chat box and we're gonna read it out loud. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paula, Miguel, Manuel, and including Sergio for inviting us to present our work in progress about the stock exchange in Colombia. As the title says, Los mismos en las mismas, we are wondering about how Colombia still has this concentration of ownership in the large companies, and how is this related with the financial development of Colombia. The motivation of our discussion, because this started with a coffee about Sergio's thesis on the banking industry in England, and my doctoral thesis about business groups in Colombia, in where I asked about how there is a relation between the increase in the number of group affiliated firms and the changes in the financial legislation between 1950 and 1980. And discussing about the sources, the fact that we have statistical information from the stock exchange registered in the statistical books of the central bank. How the question was like, Sergio, how can we use this to discuss a little bit more about financial development in emerging economies? Also, we found that there is an increasing interest in the literature about this relationship between the political power structures and finance. Colombia, different from other Latin American countries, did not follow this path of having at least one dictatorship during the 20th century. Actually, what we have was a military coup that followed after the assassination of the liberal candidate Jorge Eliécer Gaitán, and this was succeeded by a semi-authoritarian political arrangement that was only in power for years and a little bit and a few months, and it didn't change dramatically the financial or economic policies. Also, in Latin America, and I see here Pablo and Sebastián, and also Paula, who can confirm or not what we are saying, there was populism and authoritarianism in Latin America, while in Colombia, we have a sharing of government every 4 years, a change in the political party in charge, first the liberals, then the conservatives, and there were an agreement on how to maintain the macroeconomic stability of the country, although we were in the middle of a period of violence and the starting in the 60s of the conflict. By the early 1950s, and that's something that we found in the editor notes of the review of the central bank, the financial market was a little bit more developed than the ones in the Southeast Asia. However, the government was driving companies to have to register, to list themselves into the stock market with the idea that if the number of public companies increase, there will be a democratization of capital and more access to people to investment. Actually, it was even said it was an alternative to savings. However, today, we still have a small stock exchange, one that is actually having a project to merge with the stock exchange of Peru and the stock exchange of Chile. And we still have the same listed companies, large listed companies affiliated to business groups that are the ones that make the largest transactions in the stock exchange. Which is why we have this motivation and curiosity of knowing what actually happened during these years or between 1950 and 1980, when the business groups got more power in the market, and where we see that after the consolidation of the Bogotá Stock Exchange, we have the creation of 2 more regional stock exchanges in a period when in other Latin American countries, except in the case of Chile and Peru, regional stock exchange were disappearing. So the research questions and our methodological strategy is basically, we know that we have a political agreement. We move from a semi-authoritarian political regime to a political regime where the 2 political parties share every 4 years the control of the macroeconomic policy. And we have the incomplete development of the stock exchange in Colombia. So the question for this paper is, within that framework, how was the transformation of capitalism in the region? And we are going to focus on this unexplored data that we have found on the Bogotá Stock Exchange. We have worked today from 1949 to 1969, but we are still working on the data to extend it until at least 1982, when we have a banking crisis that changed again the financial legislation. And to analyze this, we are implementing a mixed methods strategy. And by mixed method strategy, we said is we are combining the archival research with for data collection, and to collect qualitative information on how the manager of the central bank, the director of the central bank, how the Minister of Finance, and how other important members of the government refer to the Bogotá Stock Exchange, and also how business leaders refer and use the stock exchange. And we are using econometric models to estimate some of this interaction between the data and what was said about the stock exchange. So the question that we have to answer for reviewers, where does this paper fit? And the question that we hope is an invitation to everyone that is listening today to work on other stock exchanges in emerging markets is wondering about the development of the stock exchange in emerging markets, because one of the literature, some authors argue that the not developed stock exchange markets exist because there are institutional factors. Others said that business groups and this concentration of ownership that we found in Colombia is because there are not stock exchange markets developed. However, in a paper that we just submitted with a paper with Sergio for the last revision, we argue that it was because, and it comes also from my thesis, that it happened, this non-development of the stock exchange in Colombia happened because large firms, most of them group affiliated, capture and colonize all the transactions in the market. So they actually use the stock market to move capital between them. So that's the point that we are trying to see if that we can see this further in the paper and in other stock exchange, because we have seen also that it's close to the case of Peru. Also because we want to add the variable of the political arrangement that each country has. So how being in a specific, in a democracy, that but with a special arrangement between the government officials and the political parties, can have an impact on the financial markets, and how long this impact could stand in the economic growth. We also feed into the discussion, and that's something that we are developing a little bit further, between it is a bank-based or it is a market-based financial system, the one that helps development in economies like the Colombian economy. And the hypothesis that we are saying is basically that maybe the slow and inefficient development of the capital markets in countries where you have a dependence in one commodity, in the case of Colombia, coffee, the existence of illegal markets, yeah, from the 70s, the boom of marijuana, and in the 90s, the boom of cocaine, plus large business groups, could mean that the capital markets are actually not as inefficient. They are only efficient for the ones that are doing business. So that's something that we want to ask and explore a little bit better. And we also want to question this point on that the stock exchange did not work as an efficient resource allocating mechanism across firms and families. That's something that we want to question further. So what we have done, we have collected the data and revised the data from 1949 to 1969. We have run panel regressions, which is what Sergio is going to explain. And we have the first results of what is happening with the transactions in the stock exchange. After a revision of these first regressions, we are now having a look on the central bank reports and on national newspapers to create to understand the context and to understand the language that was used about the stock exchange. So we're reading lots, and we are going to do a content and text analysis to create an index. And this index is inspired by the work of Batilossi and other authors that they use qualitative and text analysis to create an index to include in the panel regressions. After we finish this, what we're going to do next is to look into more panel regressions, which Sergio is going to explain a bit more what we are going to do. So as you see, this is a work in progress, which we have, which we think is going to give us a bit more information on how the capital markets behaves in an emerging economy that depends on depended on the exports of coffee. This period, the one from 1950 to 1982, was actually a period of important changes for Colombia. First, it was the start of the violence period. Second, we have the arrival of the World Bank mission with Alfred Hirschman and Lachlan Curry, who promoted the changes in the financial system and changes in the access to credit to the private sector. Basically, what happened in this period is that Colombia went from an agricultural and rural economy to a semi-industrial and urban economy. And that is very important because Colombia is a country of regions and a country of cities. So it's in this period when the cities capital of the main regions grew faster, and there was an important increase in population, but also there was an increase of migration from rural areas to the cities, first because of the job availability, and second because the violence transformed the production system. It's also in this period when there was a change in the labor market, and more unions were established, and the business associations, gremios in Spanish, got a strong lobbying power. So we have, for example, the Federación Nacional de Cafeteros, the Coffee Growers Association. We have the ACOPI, which is the association for small and medium companies, and ANDI, which is the National Association of Industrialists. And that's only 3 examples of 3 gremios that got more power and stronger during this period. The economic cycle, as I said before, remained attached to the coffee prices, so an increase in the prices of coffee meant an increase in the liquidity of the market, and the other way around. Also, we have an increase in liquidity in the market in the 1970s, explained by the marijuana boom and a year and a half of as the central bank decision of having what was called the ventanilla siniestra, where anyone could change dollars without registering neither the amount or where the money came from, which increased the liquidity in both dollars and pesos. And the financial sector, including the central bank, were having important reforms in the early 1950s, in the mid-60s, and then in the early 1980s. Sergio.
Okay, thank you, Beatriz, for the introduction, setting the motivation and a summary of what we've done so far. So I'll just show a bit more of the results that we've had so far, and also sort of try to and motivate the questions and that we have, the things that we would want you to help us with. And particularly, it's this, well, we've run across some, let's say, controversial comments when we've said that we're using mixed methods to analyze a research question. And that's something we're still not quite clear, rather, regarding what we should do, whether we should just divide this paper into two, have a qualitative paper on the one hand and a quantitative paper on the other, or what we think that makes more sense, to build this robust mixed method strategy in order to answer the question. And the thing is, because we're trying to prove something that's a bit weird of what is expected. So you expect efficiencies in financial markets, and we're trying to see the opposite. And we're trying to disentangle relations between firms and, well, affiliated to business group, as Beatriz said in the other paper, and now here with the political setting. So it becomes, I think, clear for us, but perhaps not for everyone, the need to understand this in different levels and layers, as like an onion. So this is simply a graph of the presidents of Colombia during the 20th century, 20th and 21st century. And the colors shows the political affiliation of the president. Blue for conservative, red for liberal, green for the military board, the coup and the dictator Gustavo Rojas Pinilla, and then the board, those in green in the early 50s. And then, well, that yellow line is the new constitutions in 1991 that allow the country to have more political parties, hence the other colors towards the end of the graph. But, well, it's period beyond our scope. So if you go to the next, so we would just want to highlight here that after the green, that's the dictatorship, you see red, blue, those four. Those are the National Front. That's the agreement Beatriz was telling us about when they decided that they were going to share the political power between the main two parties in order to try and mitigate, reduce violence. And let's move to the next one. And here is a couple of graphs that try to motivate this further. And what you see here, the green one, it's the GDP growth. It's rather constant. Colombia throughout the 20th century was always somewhat around 4.5% on average, and was not very much affected by the crisis as other Latin American countries. But what is really interesting here is to see that the interest rate spread is increasing, which basically means credit is becoming more expensive for firms to access funds for investment, right? And that would motivate, that would incentivize the use or the access to the market to try and find funds and issue shares to find funds for investment. But that's not actually what we're seen. Next slide. Here, for one, we can go to the questions towards the end, but it's the interest rate spread published by the central bank. And here we're just trying to see that, well, except for that hump on the purple line for investment that's related to the dictatorship, all the series are rather flat. Savings, private savings, and public savings remain rather flat and low compared to other countries, and particularly developed economies, which also suggests that not much is going in terms of a growing industry in the country, and there's not a lot of incentive for banks to participate in the market, to issue credit to firms to grow, and rather another motivation for the financial market to be more dynamic, as what we're seeing. Next, I think we're just running a bit short on time. Let's just go to this one. That's the one I wanted to show. So we have some macro series that show that give us information on how the system, although understood as a bank-based system, is not actually, we don't have many banks either, and a very dynamic growing credit market, but we also don't have a very dynamic financial market. So what we're trying to do on the qualitative side is try to understand through the reports of the central bank what is happening in terms of the movement of the stock exchange, how firms issue their shares, how active they are. And we brought here today just one example of the things we're trying to deal with, as they are unstructured data, and trying to decide on the appropriate method, if you like to, because so here we have a report, actually a speech of the president Mariano Espina Perez on the 1st of January of 1949. That's the year after the assassination of Jorge Eliécer Gaitán. And what he says in his speech is trying to bring calm to the country. He's trying to say that everything is okay, and although we'll see the word problems on the top of the graph, and then solutions or solución a little bit further down. And he's saying through his speech that although there are some problems, there are more solutions, and that the country has arrived at a stable and peaceful environment, and that the violence period is over. And actually what we're seeing is that it's only starting, right? And then after this, well, there's the military coup and the military board and the National Front. So we're trying to implement the construction of the index that Beatriz was saying through artificial intelligence. Well, this is content analysis first, to try and understand how much do we have to read of all the thousands of documents that are around, and how much can we implement into artificial intelligence to understand these reports and the signal and the sentiment, whether it's positive or negative. And what we're seeing is that, well, we cannot just let the algorithm deal with everything, that we have to inform it, we have to clean further the words that come into this analysis. And basically it means building a dictionary to run all the text that we want to inform, and then to train the algorithm, so which would be a quantitative method to create the index that could be analyzed through qualitative methods. So we're sort of in between these, and trying to understand how to explain these two editors has been a bit tough. Some of them have just told us that we should only say that we're doing quantitative methods, and there were using artificial intelligence to create this index and then econometrics. So that's a bit where we're now in between. And then I just want to show you that the first regression, so we have an idea of what's happening. So we gather data from 1949 to 1969 for these regressions, and then we have as our dependent variable a measure of volume or liquidity of the stock to try to proxy efficiency of the market. And then on the right hand side, we have information for all these stocks and the firms. So the price, and then the reserves, capital, dividends, all things that should signal what is a better and more secure, safer investment, and hence sort of promote liquidity and trading in the market. And what we try to argue is that that actually does not happen. So if you go to the next slide. So this is the first result. And I think we can just leave it here. And we were trying to show with this table, and you can ignore the numbers. The main message here, the chief message here is that, well, the first line, which is the price or the price change, is actually affecting the volume of trading, and that it's something that you shouldn't expect. Rather, things like capital, reserve, and dividend, they should promote trading, and they should increase the demand for these instruments in the financial markets. And we're seeing that with the capital, that sort of happens, but with dividends, we find something very weird. The more dividends the firm pay, the lower the transaction volumes. And then when we look this throughout different sectors, and that's the AGR, agriculture, industry, services, these are all negative, and the baseline is financial industries, financial services, which means that actually the firms or the shares that are being traded are mainly in bank shares. And then we, in the other paper, also demonstrate that the higher volume of trading that we see are firms connected to business groups. And then what we want to look at in this paper in particular is for each political party in government. So the baseline here is the military coup board, the dictatorship, and the military board. And then we see that the Conservative Party before and after and during the National Front, you can see lower volumes of trading there during the National Front, a bit higher than compared to the military dictator and board. And there's no really difference with the liberal. And what's something that also further motivates our analysis is that in these two bottom lines, the credit growth in percentage and the interest rate margin, what I was saying, those, and here they have the same sign. So as credit grows, there's more trading in the financial markets. That could say that the economy overall is growing, and hence the need for the instrumental variables approach that Beatriz was saying, that we need to look at this further down with more care. But the fact that you see the interest rate margin, it's what you should expect to happen. So the more expensive and more inefficient bank credit becomes, the more trading you see, right? So I think we can just start concluding here. So what we're finding is that there's indeed some inefficiencies, or what we're beginning to understand as not inefficiencies, but strategic decisions by business groups, by very big firms to access both credit, because they are the owners of the banks, indeed, actually. And then those are the shares that you see being traded in the stock exchange, which has actually a very low trading volume overall. Prices are rather stagnant throughout these 20 years that we look at these. Prices don't really change that much. Volumes are low, and that would signal inefficiencies in the standard financial theory but we're trying to understand this in a different way. So who were benefiting, and in the other paper we demonstrated that were business groups, and here we're in the next steps by looking at also news reports and these central bank reports, news articles, newspaper articles, and central bank reports. We're trying to disentangle these connections, whether we can see also some relationships between the government, and here that's the important thing, regardless of which party is in power, hence the title of the paper, but powerful people in government connected to these firms, which are the ones that are being traded in the financial market, creating an efficiency strategy in that sense for these groups. Okay, so we welcome all the questions, suggestions, and discussion. No.
Thank you so much, Sergio and Beatriz, for this very interesting presentation. And now we open the floor for questions. You can either raise your hand with the respective function on Zoom, or you can just type your question on chat and I'm going to read it out loud. So we have a question by Juan Flores. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, Beatriz and Sergio. Very interesting presentation. So I have a couple of questions, rather out of ignorance than really something much more informed. But so my first question is regarding the official policies from the government and central bank on credit markets. As far as I know, this period is pretty much the emergence of public banks and public credit to the industry, to the agriculture, and so on. So I was wondering whether that was something that might have influenced the relationships that you observe, knowing that perhaps certain governments are supporting more credit markets than others. So you have different administrations, and some promote more credit going from public banks than others. So that's the first question. And the second one is, I look at this money doctrine and so on, but in the period before, and pretty much of the discussion there was precisely how to develop stock markets and so on. And one of the solutions by Kemmerer and others was to develop the discount market. Central bank steps in by discounting specific kinds of commercial paper and so on. I don't know if that's pretty much the discussion that you're having, but I guess that's a way to complement, your both of your messages, the econometric part and rather the qualitative evidence, is to know whether some of the discussions by the World Bank and by others were also concentrating on how the central bank was interfering or participating through the discount market or not. I mean, we can go through all this literature on the underdevelopment of financial markets, and pretty much it is that they work quite badly, but also that they are pretty much influenced by government preferences, let's say it that way, without going into the details. Yeah, but again, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Yeah. So thank you, Juan, for the very good question. That's something that we have been asking ourselves too, because so the first proposal of the World Bank that it was actually the first mission of the World Bank for Development, and it was in 1949. And the recommendations from the World Bank was you have a very you need to change the functions of the central bank. Although it came from the Kemmerer mission in 1920, the World Bank mission said you need to change a bit the functions of the central bank. And by changing the functions of the central bank, what they meant, it was they need to lose control over credit to industries, yeah, and let commercial banks increase the amount of credit they can give in the market. And they need to change, we need a change in the term of the loans for certain industries. And it was actually what Brando studies in his thesis, that is the arrival of development banks. The following changes in the legislation meant the opening of a regional development bank, corporaciones financieras, where you have in the board of directors owners of large companies plus government officials. So this is another, let's say, agent that came into another institution that came into the financial system, and a financial institution that is a regional development bank, which funds depend in both the government, foreign institutions, and regional entrepreneurs. And then later in the 70s, we create the mortgage system that was also a new financial institution to the market. So basically what the question that you ask is wonderful, because it's the point on what is more important there, the bank-based system, in terms that we have different types of financial institutions moving credit and confirming what we see in the econometric results, or the development of the stock market. Because when we read, we only put in these slides the example of the president saying that everything was all right and we are building a country and this is a republic. But in the next 2 years, yeah, it was in 1951, the director of the agency that sees the company, the industry and commerce, so the Superintendencia de Industria y Desarrollo, he says in his speech that is published in the central bank, that what Colombia needs is an increase in the public limited company. So basically, that what we need is that more shareholders in the companies, all via the stock exchange, because that's the only way how Colombia is going to be more developed. So that in 2 years, the speech changed from bank to stock exchange, and then in 1959, it moved back to banks. So yes, precisely that's the point that we want to keep exploring, and that is why we decided, let's go and see what was written in these reports and what is being written in the press.
And also an additional thing to that, and it's precisely when you look at the literature, Colombia is understood as a bank-based system even today, and the policies and what you mentioned, these missions were aimed at developing this system and allocating credit for industry mainly, like those specific industries chosen centrally that would bring economic growth to the country, sort of living outside consumer credit or non-investment credit. But we see that the allocation of credit remains rather stagnant as well. And even though it's becoming more expensive, and that should incentivize firms to access the financial market, the stock exchange, we don't see that either. And then also, one thing that when we started these conversations with Beatriz, was also both studied in the UK, and I personally found it weird coming from Colombia and seeing that a lot of people had shares and bonds, and even they got them for their birthdays or baptisms or whatever from their godfathers, godparents, and that didn't happen at all here. So there's a thing of why don't we have that here? Why there is not like an access to the financial market at that level? Why aren't financial markets democratized to that level that households or non-institutional investors can access them? And then we see that this has been a very closed market with very low volume of trading, with high transaction costs, very inefficient when you think of these things in terms of the corporate finance literature. Then it would suggest that this makes no sense at all. What we find is that regardless of who was in power, it's more related to don't mess with the money at the end of the day, regardless of whether you have a military coup, the assassination of this candidate, presidential candidate that brings this violence period. Then you have everyone gather around thinking how to mitigate or minimize violence, then reducing volatility in the political arena. But at the end of the day, the markets remain rather closed for small firms, for SMEs to access them, at the same time as that's happening as well with the banking system. So I think we're sort of challenging the definition of what would be efficiency within the traditional corporate finance literature. That's some of sort of the idea here, but we still need to go further and deeper in pinpointing these relationships across these actors.
Great. So Patrice Robite asks in the chat, hi, interesting work. I was wondering if you could clarify via what mechanisms political change affects the stock market development. Maybe the political agreement might have reduced uncertainty, which would increase the investment in stock market development. By stock market development, a common measure of development is stock market capitalization slash by GDP. Are you able to state the facts, low level of financial development, and go backwards in the sense of exploring various reasons? And before you answer, I think that I would like to jump in, because I was very interested in this question of what exactly is the mechanism here, because Sergio just ended by saying that you want to challenge this idea of what is exactly an efficient credit market, an efficient stock exchange, but at the same time, it seems like that we need more information about the political economy behind the relationship between the political elite and these credit markets, right? Because, for example, from what I understand of Colombian history, which is not much, unfortunately, I understand that there was a lot of uncertainty and fear of a return to another period of political violence, even after this agreement between members of the political elite. So I was wondering if the way that the subsequent political administrations created incentives to kind of stall the development of the stock exchange was a way to keep this compromise valid, right? In the sense, you mentioned the role of business groups, interest groups in kind of capturing the Colombian stock exchange. And I was wondering if the stock exchange was also a mechanism for money laundering, for like keeping this illegal market an integral part of this political regime, but also the overall economy. I have other questions, but I would love to hear what you think about this.
Do you want me to go first? I can jump in first and you can complement. Also, I think you can stop sharing so we can see our faces bigger and we can go back to the slides in case we need to. So, well, very, very, very interesting, good questions. And first for Patrice. So that's actually what we sort of do in the other paper. We actually look at market capitalization, and in that paper, we find that you see a higher trading volume for firms that were affiliated to business groups. And the hypothesis, so because, well, this is part of a bigger research agenda in the stock exchange in Colombia, but also that we're trying to invite people, gather people to look at other markets. And there's some conversations for Chile, Mexico, Argentina, but anyone who wants to join in the project, of course, is very welcome to do so. And then in that other paper, we look at market capitalization, and we find this. So we find that business groups were capturing the market. They basically they advocated for the establishment and development of the stock exchange, but then you see the trading concentrated among the shares of these firms. So not really contributing to development in a broader sense, making it more efficient, making it more welcoming, or inviting for other firms to join the market and find funds for investing, as you would see, you would expect. And where we're trying to think is that our debate is also the discourse of political parties. So in Colombia, you have traditionally, although you have after 1991, as I said, with the new constitution, we had, I think at one point, hundreds or so parties, and then they're again merging back to almost 2 or 3, ideologically at least. But then at the end of the day, even though they have very different discourses, you don't see that translated into policies when they come into power, and you see rather constant, at least in terms of economic development, rather consolidated stand, if you would say so. And as for
Can I add something? Can I add something before you keep going? It is important to understand also that the power of the Coffee Growers Association, their power was on macroeconomic policy. So the macroeconomic stability of the country and the decisions taken by the Minister of Finance or anything related with macroeconomic indicators, policies, was taken by the board of the Coffee Growers Association, plus the central bank board, plus the government officials. So let's say that the mechanism was, it is important that we have discussed how to include it in the model, is the coffee prices and the changes in this board of directors, and how they actually created a level where macroeconomic stability of the country was directly related with the coffee prices, which leave a space in the stock market to companies, to large companies, to control and use the stock market as a way to gain access to more investment, more capital for investment, to move around the group affiliated firms. That's one point that we see. The mechanism is, we have macroeconomic stability, we have a small stock exchange. How we use this small stock exchange is what I just wanted to add to Sergio. And that's something that we know because of what we have read, the importance of the Coffee Growers Association as the ones that help to decide the macroeconomic policy. However, we still need to explore how this affected the stock exchange. Yeah, because they have banks, they had a bank, they have an investment fund, they have a seat in the central bank committee. Now, how that translates into the stock exchange.
And for what Paula was asking about money laundering, we do see, well, we think we see that not officially, but that's beyond our period of analysis. There's something called, or known as la ventana siniestra, sinister window. Basically, the central bank did not ask for the sources of incoming dollars, and then you see a surge of dollars flooding into the economy with no questions asked about their source. In the period of early.
I think we are not denying the laundry money, but we have two crucial moments in the illegal market. First, as I said at the beginning, the marijuana boom in the 1970s, that we actually see an increase in the liquidity in the market, and we see an increase in the transactions, but we cannot explain the increase in the transactions only because there were some illegal money coming in. We can explain it. We can explain it because we see an increase in transactions by largest companies that were well known by the general public, and this type of companies that and that's another discussion in the literature, that give trust, this sense of trust to the individual investor, and we see an increase in the transactions. We have also identified, and sorry if I go back to my thesis, we identified that there are large companies that between 1974 and 1976, they were trying, there was one financial business group that was trying to get ownership of industrial business groups. So that business group invested lots of money in order to buy out the shares from other companies. So that's why we can explain in that moment, at the same time as the Ventanilla Siniestra was happening, there was also an intention of takeover from one group to the others. And that still happens. It happened in December 2021, happened again, another group trying to buy out one group. So that's the first moment. The next, and it's after our period, is the cocaine boom and the drug cartels. Actually, what happened that could be said is in 1983 onwards. But what we see is that we have from 1983 onwards, we have 3 stock exchanges: Bogotá, Medellín, and Cali. Yeah, so that's something that we can research in the future. Why the 2 cities that have illegal cartels have a stock exchange in a moment when the rest of the world was closing the regional stock exchanges. But then we don't see, we cannot see, we don't see jumps, specific jumps on the whole stock exchange, because there are other mechanisms to launder money. Yeah, there are other ways to launder money much better than the stock exchange. And then we have that in 2001, they decided to merge and to have only one stock exchange. And that's there is one data that I always give when talking about the capital market, the stock exchange in Colombia, is that in 1886, the London Stock Exchange had registered 2010 companies, all listed, all with transactions, with daily transactions. And in Colombia, when they merged the three stocks, they have only in 2001, only 2010 companies listed, and only 61 of them did daily transactions for a year. So that gives us an idea of the size of the Colombian Stock Exchange. So let's say that in terms of the laundry money, illegal markets, there is lots more to explore about the Colombian Stock Exchange. And however, we can see, and when we see the data by sector, and that's something that we were discussing the other day, because we found that oil in 1 year in 1965, was it? There were no transactions at all.
61, it disappears.
61. It disappeared, the transactions of the oil sector.
Even though it's one of the main sectors in Colombia. The highest income for the national government is oil, come from soil.
Yeah.
Legal.
But then you have, for example, you see movement in the building sector. So construction has movement, and has movement close to this. So during the late 60s, the 70s, and then in the early 80s. And so building construction is by excellence one of the sectors where laundry money is made. So if we go specifically to the sectors, I am sure we can answer better your question. So if you want to join the exploration, come in.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much, Beatriz and Sergio, for this great discussion. And I invite you all for our next session on April 10th, when we're gonna welcome Matteo Calabrese, presenting the paper Archaeology of a Treasure Island, Actors and Practices of Holdings in Luxembourg, 1929-1940. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.